So we'll recap a little bit what we did last time, and then we'll go a bit further. The original point of the Rebbe's being mayor right at the beginning is that the Perek Tezayin is a new biur which differs from what the Frierdiker Rebbe was saying beforehand in the Hemshech. Beforehand, how did we learn the inyan of Mailo Mata? As the Rebbe calls it, Pshutei Shel Nista B'Torah. When you're talking about Mailo Mata, you mean to say that the Oir and Sof is Bli Gvul, that it goes all the way to Maila and all the way to Mata Mata. So what is Maila and Mata referring to? It's referring to the places where he's going, where Oir and Sof is going. The Mokim Achi Elyon and the Mokim Achi Tachton. That's the simple pshat. We're saying that Ein Sof, it's so Ein Sof, it can go to the highest places to those places. But why is that pshuta? Why don't we say that Ein Sof itself has Maila Mata? We don't want to say that. Because Maila Mata is a description of Gvul. It's a Teirim of Gvul. And you can't say Teirim of Gvul in something which is Ein Sof. So therefore we try and say that Maila Mata is not that Ein Sof has within it Maila Mata. Ein Sof goes to places which are Maila Mata, to the highest place and to the lowest place. Comes Perek Tezayin, and the Frierdiker Rebbe changes, and he says, no, there's another pirush, another way of learning Maila Mata. We're going to take Maila Mata and put it into Ein Sof. Ein Sof itself has Maila Mata. Ein Sof itself has a Madrega Elyon and a Madrega Tachton. One's called Maila, one's called Mata. So the Rebbe wants to know, basically, in other words, why are you changing course? Or more, by Michoel, Minolan, where are you getting this from, that there's two Madregas in Ein Sof? And the second question will be, how comes you're saying there's Madregas in Ein Sof? Till now, Ein Sof was Bli Gvul, all the way. And it goes L'mayla Maila and it goes L'mata Mata. Now that you're taking Maila Mata and you're putting it into Ein Sof, so you're making Madregas in Ein Sof, you're making Inyonim which sound like Gvul, Hagbolas, Madregas Mechulokis, Yesh Hefesh Gadol B'nehim, you're putting it into Ein Sof. So how does Ein Sof, something which is Ein Sof, how does it have Madregas in it? So the Rebbe first goes an attempt to explain, maybe there's no change in the Pirush. Maybe we can stick with the old Pirush. Maila Mata still means that Ein Sof is Oila and Ein Sof is Nimshach, Yerel Mata. The Frierdiker Rebbe says it's two Madregas in Ein Sof. So we can say that he's referring to the Oir HaKolul Ba'atzmusay, which when the Oir is Kolul Ba'atzmusay, it's the Yecholis Lahoyer, and that Yecholis is also Yecholis Shaloi Lahoyer. So there's the inyan of Maila Mata you can find in Yecholis. So we're not saying that Ein Sof has Madregas, has different inyanim. Ein Sof is an Oir Echad. It's coming from Yecholis, and the Yecholis has two inyanim. What are the two inyanim? We're calling them Maila Mata, which basically, what is it? The Yecholis Lahoyer and the Yecholis Shaloi Lahoyer. So maybe, and if that's the case, it's not a new Pirush. Because why does Oir go up and down? Why does it have an Oila? It's Oila L'mayla and Yoel L'mata Mata. Because the Oir comes from the Yecholis, and the Yecholis has in it the Yecholis Lahoyer, and the Yecholis Shaloi Lahoyer is from the Yecholis Lahoyer comes out Hamshachas HaOir, and from the Yecholis Shaloi Lahoyer comes Aliyas HaOir. So it's what we were saying the whole time. Oir and Sof, Oila L'mayla and Yoel L'mata. Where does it come from? From two inyanim, two madregas in Yecholis. If that would be the case, then there's no new Pirush in Perek Tezayin. Says the Rebbe, you can't say we're talking about Yecholis. Why can't you say about Yecholis? Because it says clearly in the Maamar that there's two madregas. The Russian madregas doesn't pass. You can't say that in Yecholis. Yecholis is one Yecholis. There's two inyanim in the Yecholis, but it's one Yecholis. You can't say madregas. But the Rebbe goes further and he says, I'm just repeating from last time. The Rebbe goes further and says, maybe we can be doichek. Maybe we can squeeze in and say that the Frierdiker Rebbe, when he says two madregas, he's still referring to Yecholis. How can you say two madregas? It doesn't mean mamish madregas. He means two tnuas. There's two tnuas in Yecholis. It can be noted to being meir or shaloi lahoyer. So there's two inyanim in Yecholis, and the Frierdiker Rebbe calls them madregas. But really he means two inyanim, two netias in Yecholis. And the Rebbe says, no, you can't say that. It's definitely not talking about Yechidas, because when the Frierdiker Rebbe says two madregas, even if you want to be doichik, the pshat of the word madregas, but what he says afterwards throws away that doichik. What does he say afterwards? He says the two madregas v'yesh hefresh gadol beinehem. So if you want to make them into madregas bedakas, fine, but here it's begasus. It's not bedakas, it's hefresh gadol beinehem. This you definitely cannot say about Yechidas. And therefore, we're going to have to say that the Frierdiker Rebbe is not talking about Yechidas, he's talking in Oir and Sof. Oir and Sof has two madregas, L'maylo Namato, which is what he goes on to explain later, the two madregas of Sosam Legabe HaMakablim and Sosam Be'etzim. Okay, so does that answer any question? That just leaves us back with the original question. The original question is, why did the Frierdiker Rebbe choose to change, or how could he change the Pirush of Ma'ila Mata? Till now, Ma'ila Mata means Aliyah v'Yerida. And now what does it mean? Two madregas in Oir and Sof. The Oir and Sof itself has Ma'ila Mata. So where do you get that from? Minolon. And the second question is, how could there be an Oir and Sof madregas? If it's Oir and Sof, how could it have two madregas? Now when the Rebbe asked the question, now that's basically what we learned last time. When the Rebbe asked the question, how can Oir and Sof have madregas, the Rebbe asked the question in an unusual way. The version the Rebbe uses is, we know from the Alter Rebbe that Oir and Sof, let's look at the end of the first ket of Sif Beis, towards the end when he asked the questions, Omnam tzarech lahavin, eich ef shaloyme de Oir and Sof atzmoi, yesh beis madregas l'mayla niketz namat halim tachlis. ועלי מאחר שנקרא בשם אין סוף, וכמו שמאז בעד מהזוכים בכמה מקיימים שאין הפירוש בזה אור של אין סוף, אלא שהאור עצמי הוא אין סוף. It's a real אין סוף. והכוונה בזה אין סוף הוא אמיתי, שאין לו ראש ואין לו תחילה ואין לו סוף. ואם כן, איך שייך למה בוי למעלה מעלה ולמטה מטה. הרי זה עניין, האין סוף מאחר שמשחלק במדרגס. How does the Rebbe ask the question? How can there be madregas in Oir and Sof? Why shouldn't there be madregas? Because he's a real Ein Sof. Ein Sof Amiti, which Ein Loi Rosh, Ein Loi Tchila, Ein Loi Sof. It's a very unusual expression to say on Oir and Sof, Ein Loi Tchila. Right? We never use such an expression, Ein Sof. In fact, it's clear in all the places that talk about Ein Sof and Ein Tchila that on Oir you say only Ein Sof. You always say Yesh Loi Tchila. His tchila is his sibba, which is the atzmos. On atzmos you can say ein le tchila, because atzmos is a kadman ha'amiti, mechuyev ha'metzias, ad shalei nivroilam, mishin nivroilam, is always there, always has been there. So you can say ein le tchila, you say he's the kadman ha'amiti. But or, the lashon in there of the Rebbe Nishma in Samach Vav is mechudish be'emes. It's a davar mechudish. It's Ein Sof because the Eibishter made the oil, wants the oil to be Ein Sof, so the oil is Taka Ein Sof. But you can't say Ein Le Tchila on oil. Ein Le Tchila is only one Ein Le Tchila, which is Atzmos. So what does the Rebbe mean when he says Ein Le Tchila và Ein Le Sof? And why would he put it in anyway? He wants to say Ein Sof Amiti, so bring from the Alter Rebbe, Become Michoel. Where is that? Tafkus, I didn't actually look up Tafkus somewhere to see what it says there. But I don't. If it says there Ein Le Tchila, that would be marvelous. But as far as I know, in every other place, it never says such a thing on oil. And they can't say on it because Ein Le Tchila means a kadman. You can only say kadman on atzmos. So what does it mean here by Ein Le Tchila? Now, maybe we could go and say Ein Le Tchila means we know that the koyach of atzmos is nimshach through the oil. Where does the whole inyan of Oir me'en hamor come from? The moker hachirishin is going to be Tanya Geras HaKodesh Simachov, where he says that the oir is ke'en hamor. Interestingly, the lashon that's quoted all over Chassidus is me'en hamor, but the actual lashon of the Alter Rebbe there in Tanya is ke'en hamor with a chav. And in one of the sichos, the Rebbe says me'en oder ke'en. You can say either way. What the difference is, the Rebbe didn't explain. In Sefer HaRachim, the Rabbi Yoel brings down over there that Roiv HaMekaymes, it says Me'en. That's what Taka seems like. So I take his word for it. The Reva Makemis says me'en, and that's very strange because in Tanya itself it says ke'en. But that's a side point. So in the Mokker, when he talks about the oil is ke'en hamor, or me'en hamor, there he says that the oil has the ability to be mahavi yesh mi'ayin. How does the oil have the ability to mahavi yesh mi'ayin? Because he's me'en hamor, and he's davuk to the moor, he's me'en hamor. So the koyach hamor, the koyach ha'atzmus, which is the koyach of ein leitchila, is nimshach through the oil. Or the lashon of the Fidik Rebbe elsewhere is that the koyach ha'atzmus vet arop getrogen. It's carried down through the oil. The oil is a vehicle through which the koyach ha'atzmus, the koyach of ein leitchila, is drawn down. Ein leitchila is something which is only atzmus has, and with that power, he's the Eibishter's mahavi yesh mi'ayin. That inyan of ein leitchila, you need to be mahavi yesh mi'ayin. That's the whole vort over there in the Geras HaKodesh. That to ishavis yesh mi'ayin, to create a yesh, which looks like he's a yesh and hasn't got a sibba, looks like he's ein leitchila. When you look at the yesh, you see him, you don't see where he's coming from. So he looks like ein leitchila. Who can create such a yesh that looks like ein leitchila? Only Atzmas Utaka has ein leitchila. That's the Rebbe brings it down in the very first Maamar as well, Basi Legani, over there in Yudalaf. That whole arich is that in order to create a yesh, which seems like he's an Atzmi, he's on his own, he's independent, doesn't have a tchila, that's coming from Atzmos direct. But what do you mean direct? That's an inyan that only Atzmos can give. But how does the Koyach Atzmos come down? Al Yidei the oil. So we do have an inyan of ein leitchila in the oil, because the oil is carrying the koyach of ein leitchila in order to be able to be mahavi yesh mi'ayin. Does that turn the oil into ein leitchila? Doesn't. All it does is it carries the koyach of ein leitchila. Let's give a simple marshal. The oil will call over here the shliach. And who's the Mishalech? Atzmas Hamor. Now the Shliach, we know we have all the three, at least three madregas of bittul of the Shliach. The Shliach is mamish, kamoisai, mamish. All the way. Does that make the Shliach the Mishalech? Can he also send shluchim?
Yeah.
So that means, in other words, if a Mishalech sends, if Reuven sends Shimon and says to him, Shimon, I want you to be Makadosh that ish over there, Rochel, for me. So the Shliach has been came with the Shaleach and he's mamish to the Shaleach. So who's she Mekadeshes to Reuven or Shimon? However many bittles and however many bittul mamish kamoisei, there's still two people. There's a Mashalech and the Shliach. He's so much been came of the Mashalech that he can do mamish what the Mashalech can do. But he's the Shliach of that Mashalech. And if the Mashalech decides to be Mevatel the Shliachas, that's it. You have a shliach legitin. There's also in the middle he can be mevatel, right? How can he be mevatel? But the shliach has already been kaima. He already took over the shliach. Yeah, but he's not the mashaleach. As soon as the mashaleach is mevatel, the shliachas is the shliach can no longer do whatever he was asked to do. So the shliach has to be dovuk the whole time to the mashaleach, and the mashaleach has to be giving him the koyach to do what he has to do. As soon as he withholds the koyach, the shliach can't do it. Same thing, the oil is not the mashaleach. The oil is not the mo'or. It's not atzmas hamor. He's mamish ke'en hamor. But he's not the mo'or. So the ein leitchila will never go on the oil. The oil will only always be ein sof, but it will never be ein tchila. The fact that he has the koyach of ein tchila, it means he's a shliach to take the koyach that he's been given and use it out to be mahavi yesh mi'ayin. But he never becomes ein leitchila. So therefore, so why does the Rebbe say ein leitchila on the oil? Now there is one other place where it says that you can say ein tchila on oil, but there in this other place it doesn't. It's the opposite of the mechuv and what the Rebbe is trying to say over here. The Rebbe is trying to say that because he's ein leisof, ein leitchila, ein rosh, v'sof, therefore it's not shaychus to madregas. The other place where it talks about, at least one other place where it talks about that you could say ein tchila in oil, is referring to something completely different. It's referring to that there's ein tchila to the milas and iluyim of oil And that's why there's so many madregas in oil, and you can always add more madregas to oil. So forget that ein tchila, however you're going to learn pshat over there, is a sibba that there should be madregas in oil. And the Rebbe's question is that there shouldn't be madregas in oil. So obviously the Rebbe is not referring to that pirush in ein tchila. So what are we going to do with ein tchila? Well, you've all learned Samach Vov, right? Do you ever came across it in Samach Vov, ein tchila on the oil? Huh? Huh?
That's a R, which is Yichelis.
Yichel, that's Oir HaKolo. I'm talking about the Oir HaMispashit bin HaMoir. Can you say on the Oir HaMizgala from the Moir that there's an Indian of that? You can call it Ein Tchila? But there is one place. There's a Maamar Shuva Yisrael where the Rebbe Nishra is Mechat. It seems it's a Chiddush. It's based on the Tzemach Tzedek, but it seems it's a Chiddush. What does it mean? L'chol Tichla Re'isi Kates. Kol tichle reisi kates l'chol mitzvos chamoed. He says kol tichle reisi kates. He brings a few pirushim. How does he translate kates from the Even Ezra? He says kates, according to the Even Ezra, kates could be the beginning and the end, either or. Like you have the al shnei ketzoisov of the chuba, the two corners, the two sides. You have the K'tzos HaShulchan or K'tzos HaChoshen. You have Min HaKotze El HaKotze. The end and the beginning are both called Ktsovis. So Kates could be the beginning or it could be the end. So he says over there, if you're talking about Giluim which come after the Tzimtzum, there's a Kates also B'Tchilasa, not just B'Soifa. There's also a Kates in the Tchila. Where's the Kates in the Tchila? The Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is a cutoff point. Kates actually sounds like the word cut in English. It's a kates, it's a cut-off point that up till now was Eretz Ofer, we're cutting that away, and now we're starting a fresh, a new Hamshacha, which is the Kav. So the Kav has a kates b'tchilose. It has a cut-off point where he begins. You can say, up till now that he wasn't there, now here starts the Metzias of the Kav. Hamshachas HaKav. So there's a kates b'tchilose. Whereas, says the Rebbe Shusayid, Masha'ein, Kein Rechav Mitzvos Chamoid, or Torah, which is, what does it say about Torah the Lashon? Vayhi koil me'al l'rakiyah, that koil of the Torah comes higher than rakiyah, higher than tzimtzum. So gilui, which are lamayla min tzimtzum, are lamayla from a kates. They don't have a haschol. So oir and sof shalifna tzimtzum is called ein leit tchila. It says it clearly over there. It's ein leit tchila. It doesn't have a cutoff point. What does that mean? Oir is not more. It begins somewhere. The answer is no. It doesn't begin somewhere with a kates. Of course, oir is not moir. There's oir is a gilui from moir. It's not the moir itself. It came from the moir. But there's no kates. There's no interruption. There's no cutoff point. The oir is, so to speak, flowing out of the moir without any interruptions, without any kitzim, without any cutoff points. So therefore, he's called ein le tchila. His tchila is the moir. Of course, he has a tchila. His tchila is the moir, but there's no kates. By saying ein le tchila v'ein le sof, the Rebbe is being madgish how much Ein Sof it is. It's so much Ein Sof, there's no separation between Mo'er and Oir. The Oir comes from the Mo'er and flows out with a full Ein Sof. If that's the case, so that's the question. If it's Ein Sof all the way, it's Ein Sof Amiti. It has no kates. There's nothing separating him from the Mo'er. He is Me'en HaMo'er. Does the Mo'er have Madregas? No. The Mo'er is Atzmas Yochid or Meyuchid. If the Mo'er has no Madregas, so how does the Oir have Madregas? After all, the Oir is only Megala the Mo'er. And if the Mo'er has no Madregas, then it should be Me'en that. It should also have no Madregas. And that is the question. In other words, Oir of a candle is called candlelight, right? There's nothing different about the Oir. It has to be Mamish Me'en the candle. The Oir of the sun is sunlight. The Oir of Atzmas is Atzmas light. It has also it has nothing else but being Megala the Mo'er. The Mo'er is Yochid and Meyuchid. The Oir should also be one inyan of Ein Sof. There shouldn't be Madregas. That is the question. And what is the answer to that question? Well, the Rebbe continues, also from the Alter Rebbe, which says that there's a difference between Oir and Mo'er. Oir is only a ha'ora. Ha'ora doesn't have any etzim in it, and therefore it's also not a shefa. oy v'loy moer, oy v'loy shefa, and therefore it has no atzmis in it, and therefore there could be madregas. Does that answer satisfy us? The truth is, this Indian... So
what were we thinking in the beginning? Before we said that the Oren Seif is pligul, how are we changing it now to say that it's gvul?
It's about what you want.
we're not saying it's gvul. We're saying it's Oyer Ein Sof, but it's still shaykhs to have madregas in Oyer Ein Sof. In other words,
So that's not gvul?
there's l'chayre in yonim
And
of
what changed in the answer? What changed?
Oh, that's what I'm asking. What changed in the answer? What are we saying? Are we saying that Oyer is no longer Ein Sof? No, we said it's Oyer Ein Sof. We agree it's Oyer Ein Sof. It doesn't even have a kates b'tchilas. It's mamish Ein Sof, Ein Sof hamiti. So if it's Ein Sof, so then how do you get madregas? The answer is it's only a ha'ara. And beforehand we didn't know it was a ha'ara.
So what does it even mean? Because the art is chalkos.
Huh?
What does it even mean?
That it's only a ha'ara.
No, because it's already chalkos. How does it even work?
Okay, so let's get one thing straight before we go into the thing. The question is not how do you get madregas or who makes the madregas. The koyach what we can word that well. That's a technical problem later. The question is how is it shaykhs to say madregas? The question is how is it possible to even talk about madregas when you're talking about something that's Ein Sof? Once we find an answer to that, how Oyer Ein Sof is subject to change, it can be nischalik to madregas, then we'll find out afterwards how to do it. That will be another question, how to do it. But the question is, how is it shaykhs b'chalal? That's the question. How is it shaykh to say that there's madregas in something that's Ein Sof? What's the answer? Well, it's Oyer. Well, we were talking about Oyer the whole time. Ha'ara doesn't have minayetz, and therefore what? The truth is, this answer that Oyer is a ha'ara, and therefore it's shaykhs to madregas, it says elsewhere. Finikera brings it down the Maamar, the Rebbe Rashab brings down the Maamar, Mishnah beforehand, it might also be there. The very fact that it's a ha'ara is shaykhs to madregas. But there's no hasbara why. There's no real oimek hasbara. In this Maamar, the Rebbe with 2 words adds on l'cha'ira a new explanation. Huh?
But it's not shefa.
No, he says it's Oyer not shefa. That we know it's Oyer not shefa. It's a ha'ara. But what makes that? How does that answer the question? So let's first of all say what's going to have to be the answer before we work out what the Rebbe is saying. What's going to have to be the answer if it's Oyer Ein Sof, and we say it's Ein Sof mamish all the way, me'en hamor. Nevertheless, it can have madregas. What's going to have to be the answer? We're going to have to say there's 2 levels of Ein Sof. Right? There's going to have to be 2 levels of Ein Sof. The Ein Sof of Atzmus and the Ein Sof of the Oyer. And there will be a difference. So the Ein Sof Sheba Atzmus obviously is not shaykhs to madregas. And the Ein Sof of Oyer, although it's Ein Sof, it is shaykhs to madregas. So how are you going to do that? So the Rebbe adds on 2 words. This is another rule that the Rebbe often is the chidushim are swallowed in the words. Right? This I heard from Michoel. He says the chidushim of the Rebbe are b'havlo. I mean, sometimes the Rebbe says clearly a kash and a teres. If you look at the Rashi Sichos, it's very clear. He asks a bunch of questions, brings down all the Mefarshim, says it all doesn't work. Yesh loim of the teretz, and the Rebbe gives his own answer. And then you suddenly see it's a chidush nifla, it answers all the questions, and all the Mefarshim fall into place. In Chassidus, you do find in Maamar occasionally the Rebbe says yesh loim habir bazeh, and he says occasionally, maybe more than occasionally, but a lot of times the Rebbe's chidushim is not by saying yesh loima, it's just the way he says it, and adds in a word. They say this upon in Mipi Shmur, that I think it was Lamed Zayin, that somebody wrote up the Maamar for Hagor, the Basi Legani. If I'm not mistaken, there's a Basi Legani Maamar, and there the Rebbe quoted something. I think it was from the Rebbe Marash, and the person who was writing up the Maamar wasn't Rebbe, it was somebody else. Was writing up the Maamar, and he couldn't understand. The Rebbe's quoting the Rebbe Marash, and the Rebbe Marash, if you look in the Mocker, it's a bit different. So he wasn't sure what to do. So it seemed he asked, what should he do? Should he write it down the way the Rebbe said it, or the way it's written in the Rebbe Marash's Maamar? You heard this story? No? So So the answer came through. Obviously, I'm not quoting. I'm just saying the gedank came through that if you would understand the difference, then you could do it the way I said it. If you don't understand, it's not going to help anyway. So you might as well quote the way it's written over there. So that's how it was. So they just quoted the way it was. So in other words, you have to listen to what the Rebbe is saying. He adds on a word here and there. Why do you think he's adding on a word? This is a nice from the Atzmai, how the Rabbeim sometimes add in things. This we know anyway, Bechlal. Sometimes the words are added in, and it's lav dafka shaychus to the Teichen. Where do you have such a thing? Where do you have that the Rabbeim add on something in the Maamar and it's not negel like lamaisa to the whole Maamar? What's that? Chuppah in Shiur. Yeah, but it was negel to the Maamar, no? Where do you find clearly that the Rabbeim sometimes in the middle of a Maamar and sometimes in the middle of a bring and say something that has nothing to do with anyone and it's meant for something else?
By the Tafresh design.
That's right. Frierdiker Rebbe said that if he wouldn't have mentioned in the Maamar of Tafresh Bezayin Shittas Abal Shem Tov in Ashgacha Pratis, he doesn't know if he would have made it through. Look at the Maamar Bezayin. If you tell me if you find the beer the Teves of Baal Shem Tov over there, will be interesting. You won't find it in the Maamar because he said it wasn't again. So sometimes the Rebbe said. I also heard. I remember years ago. What's his name? Tenenbaum, the Baltikea. I'm talking about the old man. He said once that he was a chayzer in Akvatsk. He was one of the chayzerim, and the Frierdiker Rebbe said a Maamar, and the Frierdiker Rebbe said a pasuk. I don't remember whether Tilim, whatever it was, a pasuk. And they looked up the pasuk, and the pasuk is not the way the Frierdiker Rebbe said it. So they had a shakla v'tarya. Since they're going back into the Frierdiker Rebbe to say the Maamar, a chazara, they used to do Lubavitch. In those days, it was like the good old days. You go back into the Rebbe Rashab. They went back into the Frierdiker Rebbe. The chayzim would chazer over the Maamar, and the Frierdiker Rebbe would be masakin, just like the Rebbe Rashab used to do in Lubavitch. He would be masakin, sometimes add on biur. So they had a shakla v'tarya. Should they quote the pasuk the way the Frierdiker Rebbe said it, or the way it says it in Tanakh? So they decided, no, there's something called Pritis HaKulmas. It's sometimes, that's how it came down, but we'll say the way it says in the pasuk. So they started saying over, and they said over the pasuk Moshe Kosov. And they said the Frierdiker Rebbe was looking down the whole time. When they said the pasuk, the Frierdiker Rebbe looked up. I said that? So they said, well, they started excusing themselves. We looked it up, and that's what it says in Tanakh. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, Du chazer wie ich gesagt, das habe ich gehört, als von Taten. And so he heard from the Rebbe Rashab, wherever, that's how it was said. You say it the way it says it. So, that's sometimes they add on things, sometimes they change things. So I'm just using that as a sniff. Sometimes the Rebbe repeats things from the Rabbeim, sometimes it's just repeating it because Azayim Umayla, and sometimes you have to see that the Rebbe is being moist or something. There's two words that the Rebbe adds on in this inyan, which you can see, he goes back to the Yecholis in the middle, where he doesn't need to, and that's the V'yuven there inside in this Hanocha. V'yuven there, if you must mavai adma zoten, the must mavai in yourself, the af shehoy atzmo in self, ava afa bekei nikar b'shem oil, lahoyre she'ena moya la'oil, she'inyan ha'oil hu ha'oil levad. V'lachein, look how he goes back to Yecholis now. Af shemitzad inyan ha'moil shezeh inyan ha'yecholis be'emes. Ein shaykh loyma mailo mata rak ma shnoise inyonim elu aval shem based argus valachs kam shen shaykh loyma shaykh have got by name is repeating something from the previous period Michoel mocken by and sof mi kiven shu ha shaykh loyma mailo mata vehem based madeges which have got by name. Do you see what is added on? You see what he's done? First of all, he's gone back to the Yecholis. We're done with the Yecholis. We had a whole Hava minute to say that maybe the Frierdiker Rebbe is talking about Yecholis. And we said, no, it can't be. He's talking about Yecholis. You can't say Madregas and you can't say Yesh Hefresh Gadol B'nei. So why are you going back to that again and say there's a difference to the way it's in Yecholis to the way we're talking about now? Because here, the Rebbe is actually adding on a biur with two words. What are the two words that he adds on? Nicer. Why is the Rebbe going back to Yecholis? Let me ask you a question. We were just talking about how Ein Sof is Ein Sof all the way. Ein Leitchila even. However, we're going to explain that, right? So it's Mamish Ein Sof. Okay, it's Mamish Ein Sof, and then the kasha is, how comes there's Madrigas in Ein Sof? I can answer you how comes there's Madrigas in Ein Sof. Because the Yecholis has Madrigas. Not Madrigas Mamish. In the Hava Amina beforehand, we were saying maybe the base Madrigas are in the Yecholis. We said, no, you can't call Madrigas in Yecholis. But then the Rebbe said, no, Efshafot, we can still squeeze them in and say they're not Madrigas, they're Tnuas. No, if they're Tnuas, so you can put two things into Yecholis, however you're going to explain it. Maybe we'll give an example later how you can stick two inyanim in Yecholis. But there is Milo Mat in Yecholis, Bedakas. So now you're asking me why Ein Sof has two Madrigas? Because he comes from the Yecholis. The Yecholis has Milo Mata, he has Milo Mata. The Ein is just being Megala where he's coming from. If where he comes from has two Milo Mata, so he's allowed to have two Milo Mata. What's the problem? We never were shoylel that there's no two inyanim in Yecholis. Before we get to the kasha of how can there be Madrigas in Ein Sof, you have to verify that there's no Madrigas in Yecholis. The Rebbe didn't do that until now. The Rebbe just said that in this minor, since the Frierdiker Rebbe uses the Lashon Hefresh Gadol B'nei, he can't be talking about Yecholis. But in Yecholis, if we wouldn't have added on those few words, Yesh Hefresh Gadol B'nei, and we would have been talking about Yecholis, could we talk about Milo Mata in Yecholis? But the Rebbe tried to squeeze in Milo Mata in Yecholis. So we have to do away with that Milo Mata in Yecholis and make Yecholis completely nothing to do with Madrigas, nothing to do with Tnuas, and nothing to do with anything that can be understood as two. We have to end up with only oneness, absolute achdus, Yochid, and then when the oil comes out, we can ask the question. So then, how can you have Madrigas and oil and self if oil is me'en amor and the mor is Yochid and Meyuchid, and there's no Madrigas there? It's coming from the Yecholis, which is achdus pshuta. So then, how are the Madrigas and oil and self? You understand what I'm saying? The Rebbe still has left a loose end. If you're going to leave Madrigas in Yecholis, then there's no question how comes there's Madrigas in oil and self. You have to get away. You have to do away with anything in Yecholis that can lend itself to meaning that there's two inyanim. Because if there's two inyanim in Yecholis, there's no shaila why oil should have two Yecholis. Of course you can have two Yecholis. If the Yecholis has two, then the oil can have two.
They're not separate.
Huh? Doesn't matter. But once you have two, it can be two.
But it's still not going to be a
and even if they're not separate, we said it's one Yecholis, but it allows itself to be called two, the way the Rebbe was saying, at least b'doichet. Why? Because it's two Tnuas. Just like Agav, what would be an explanation? How would we have Yecholis being one Yecholis but two Tnuas? In this Havamin, in this Kasal Kadaitach, which is b'doichet, how would we explain that? So just to make it a little more easier to understand that, let's give a moshel. A moshel Yedua, which is brought down in Chassidus for a similar concept. Al Kopanim Bedugma. We know we learned it now in Beis Achlifu Duchtayu. What was the moshel? Shmai V'Avtalion said the Svarim Mufshetes, and Hillel came along and said, I like that Svara, Mutter, Potter, everything's fine. Comes Shammai says, I like that Svara, Chayev, Osa. One Svara, and you took it this way, he took it that way. What's the moshel that's given? What's the dugma that's given for such a Svara? Before the Mabul was a svara that a person has in him Ra, therefore Emches Ha'adam, are going to destroy man. And what came after the Mabul? So it was Ma'ir Midas Harachmim. What did they wish to say? If a person has bad in him, I'm not going to do this again. Hold on, you just said that because he's bad, you're going to wash him away in the Mabul. After the Mabul, you say because he's bad, you're never going to do it again. So what's the svara itself? The svara itself as a person has in him bad. No, is that a reason to destroy him or to have Rahmanas on him? Depends where you go. Before the Mabul it was this way. Shittis B'Shamai, after the Mabul is that way. The svara itself is what? It's a svarim of shetis which lends itself to either direction. It has both tnuas. It's two sides of the same coin. It can go this way and it can go that way. So there's two inyanim in one svara. There's not been mitzias two svaras, because Hillel and Shammai have not come along yet and they haven't passed it. We just have a svara achas, the how a person is built. He has in him Ra. Okay, so now that we know that, what should we do? Machmir or Mekel? We'll see about that later, but there's two sides, the two pnuas in that svara. Al derech zeh, the dugma was going to say by Yecholis. There's one Yecholis. Yecholis to what? To two directions. Can be lahoya and shloi lahoya, maila amata. So this is an example of something where you could see Ki'ilu there's two inyanim in Yecholis. He says it's Yecholis echad, it's one Yecholis. But the Yecholis lends itself to two tnuas. We have to get rid of those two tnuas, because if we don't get rid of them, then when you ask the question, how comes oil has madregas, I'm going to say, well, the Yecholis has fluctuates between this way and that way, so the oil is alachas kam v'kama. The oil is allowed to have these two tnuas. So how do we get? I'm finishing in 5 minutes.
No, was there.
Yeah, he's here. So how do we get rid of the two tnuas in Yecholis? This is why the Rebbe adds on two words. He said, he goes back to the Yecholis, and he says, Ein shach leima maila maila mata mata, rak masha noise inyanim eilu. Noise gives a whole different klokite from Yecholis. Hagam, this says this everywhere, that noise and Yecholis, they're put on the same shelf. But it doesn't say it as clear as here. Noise is more clear that there are no madregas and there's nothing there. Yecholis, what's the difference between Yecholis and Noise? What does Yecholis mean? Yecholis means, Yecholis is an outlooking thing. If you remember the Lashon of the Rebbe in the Maamar, Shor Shalom Yishalom Olam in Chelik Hey, how does he define Yecholis? He says, even though Yecholis is much higher than Koyach, but Yecholis is, sof kol sof, Yecholis lekach v'kach. It's an outlooking thing. It's a Yecholis for something. When you say the word Yecholis, by definition, you mean it's a Yecholis for something else. Hagam Yecholis is one Yecholis, and it's not mischalik. And even here, when we're saying it's bedoichik, there's two tnuas. But sof kol sof, the musik of Yecholis is Yecholis for doing something. Masha'ein ke noise, the musik of noise is nothing to do with what's going to be. We're just saying his noise, whatever could be, is noise is a maila atzmis, what he is. Let's translate the word noise in the most simple way. Noise means to carry. What can you carry? Whatever is not too heavy, right? So you can carry anything. Are you more? Is there something in you which says that you are more shaykhs to this inyan or to that inyan, and that's why you're carrying these things? I can carry whatever you want. As long as it's not too heavy, I can carry it. Let's talk of it in a more broader way. If you have a shetach of stone, ground, in the middle of a stone, what can you do on this stone? You can build a skyscraper, you can build a mikveh, you can make it into a farm, you can do what you want. So what is he nicer? He's nicer whatever you want to put on that's what he's nicer. A piece of paper. How many Shiurim is this paper nicer? Whatever you want. So how many Shiurim are there now? Nothing. He doesn't have anything, but he's nicer everything. This is only dugmois because a paper doesn't be mahava the Shiurim, and the ground doesn't be mahava the skyscraper, and people don't be mahava the things that they carry. Lamaila, he's nicer because he creates all these things. He's nicer all of these inyan which is going to be mahava. But what is the musig of nicer? The musig of nicer is that there's nothing there. Or the Lashon, more beduyik is, he says the Lashon in Samach Vav at the beginning, nicer ba'atzmoi, bebechinas metzias bilti metzias nimtza. I'm sure you're familiar, metzias bilti metzias nimtza. We can't even say it's a metzias. He's nicer ba'atzmoi. It's talking about him. It's not talking about what he's going to do. Yecholis is talking about what he's going to do. Nicer is an inyan atzmi. He is who he is. Mamela, he's nicer hakel. He's nicer hakel. That doesn't mean there's hakel in there bepratias. It's just like there's no tziyurim on the piece of paper. The paper is nicer all the tziyurim. So which tziyur is over there? Nothing. It's a blank piece of paper. A block of gold. How many kelim can you make out of a block of gold? A huge block. You can make a kelim, you can make a becher, you can make a menorah, you can make a chair, you can make yourself a crown if you want. You can do whatever you want with this gold. So how many kelim are in this piece of gold? What tziyur did? There's nothing there. It's nicer hakel. Whatever tziyur you want to make out of gold. This is inside this thing. So Noisa doesn't allow for any tziyurim, even bedakas, even bedoichek, even an ahavamina. So when we say that Atzmus is Noisa Hakoil, he's obviously Noisa also the inyan of Ein Sof. And the Noisa of Ein Sof, Noisa Ein Sof, obviously is not Nitin the Madregas. Is Noisa. It's not like Yecholis. Yecholis you could have theoretically bedoichek in the Havamina try and split it up. You can't do that to Noisa. So when the Rebbe comes now and says, now I'm giving you the answer from the Alter Rebbe why Oir does have Madregas, is because Oir it doesn't have Etzem, it's Oir v'loi Mo'or, Oir v'loi Shefa, so he doesn't have that Maila of Noisa Ein Sof. He is Ein Sof, all the way Ein Sof, but he's not Noisa Ein Sof. He's Menusa from Ein Sof, but he's not Noisa Ein Sof. Atzmus is Noisa him, the Oir. Because Atzmus is Noisa Hakel, so he's Noisa Ein Sof, so therefore he's Noisa the Oir, which is Ein Sof, but the Oir is not Noisa Ein Sof, he's just Ein Sof Papoil. And in Ein Sof Papoil, there could be Madregas. It's Shaychus Madregas. How do you get Madregas? That's not Negeh over here. Negeh is, how is it Shaychus Madregas? When are we Shaylo Madregas on the level of Noisa Ein Sof? That's why the Rebbe adds in over here. Rak masha noise in yonim elu, avaloi shehem beis dargas, valachas kam v'kam, you can't say beis hefresh gadol b'neim. We've gone back to the Yecholis, but we've translated the Yecholis ba'oimek yosa. It's not just Yecholis, it's the level of noise. And in noise, there's no shaykhs to, it's impossible to have madregas. That's the whole musig of noise. By definition, there's no madregas. Noise is achtus pasha, nefesh achas, inyan ech, which has no shaykhs to his chalkas. Mashenk in Yecholis is already thinking outwards. What's a Yochel? This, that. Tak, it's one Yecholis, but it has to fluctuate between yes and no. Lahoy, shloi lahoy. So in Yecholis is not enough to say that it comes from the Yecholis. If you say Noisa, you do away with any Hischalkos, but the oil, when it comes out of the Moira, he's not Noisa Ein Sof, he's not Noisa Hakel, he happens to be Ein Sof. He's Me'en HaMoir, he is Me'en the Ein Sof, but he's only Me'en the Ein Sof. He can never be Noisa Ein Sof because he's not the Etzem. Therefore, it's Shaychas to have Madregas. How do you get Madregas? That's a whole different question. That you had last year, you must remember, Tavshim Memhei, Tzimtzum Lifnat Tzimtzum, and it is Mitzad the Yecholis Shloi Lahoy that makes the Madregas. The Loi Lahoy is a pullback, and the Lahoy is a Hamshocha, so therefore you get Mailamata. That's what Taka makes the Madregas. But the reason why it's possible to have Madregas is because he's only Ein Sof, he's only his Galus of Ein Sof, but he's not Noisa Ein Sof. That would be the Chiddush L'ch'oira of these two words, and that's the Chiddush of the whole Maamar, part of this part of the Maamar. Anyway, you could give a dugma in Nigla just to understand just an halacha with something to bring it down to earth. The difference between Noisa and Yecholis. There's only a dugma, just to try and picture it. If we take a halacha, we learn all on Rambam, right? So in Rambam you have halacha, if somebody hires a field, right? So he hires it for a month. During that month that he hires the field, is he allowed to start building things, digging holes?
Rent.
So he's rented the thing. Is he allowed to build the things? Schirus is considered a mechira as man kotza. So it's his. He can do it. He's hired the field. He's going to plant things and take things away, and he do whatever it is. It's his for now. Taka only for a while, but it's his. So he can start doing what he wants. Why is that? Because he has a kinyan in the guf hakarka. Right? What happens if he is renting the karka lepeiresov? You familiar with that? Familiar with that concept? If he's seicha the karka lepeiresov, in other words, he's renting the field only for the peiros that come out of the field. Is that considered that he has a kinyan in the karka or not? Huh?
Yes.
Why is it a kinyan in the karka? What's the proof?
Because he's Davash L'Balaylam.
You can't be kind of something which is like Bala Olam. So if he's kind of the karka for this while, he has to have a kinyan in the karka, otherwise the peiros will not belong to him. But still, what does he have in the karka? Only the peiros. Right? But not the karka itself. He can't start digging holes and building things in the middle of the karka because it's not his field. His field is only for the peirosov. Somebody who hires the field without the peirosov, the whole field, he's allowed to change things in the field. Do you see the nimshul? Peirosov is the yicholos of the karka. He's hiring the field for its yicholos. What's the yicholos of the field? To make peiros. It's a kinyan in the field, in Atzmos, in the Atzmos of the karka. Yeah, it's a kinyan in the field, but it's only peirosov. It's only about what's going to happen. You can't start changing things. So it's the etzem of the field, but it's the peirosov. It's what's going to be. So yicholos is an inyan in Atzmos, klape what's going to be. Masha'en came, when you hire the ground without the peirosov, I'm hiring this piece of, this shetach. I'm allowed to start digging holes and building things and doing what I want. Why? Because I have a kinyan in the gufa karka, in the atzmius of the karka, all the way, not just the peirosov, in whatever the karka is nicer. What is it nicer? I can build buildings, I can dig holes, I can plant things, I can do what I want. Because it's a kinyan in the gufa karka, not just the yichodos of the karka, but the karka itself. That would be like the inyan of nicer. Whatever the karka is nicer, you can change.